And my thanks to always as to Pico for that wonderful music playing us in. Okay, it's February. We're back, and we've got one of our best friends with us again. So my name's Nicky Vetts.
I'm Susan McKeown, Astronomy Ireland.
And I'm Herb Baker from the
Yes,
US.
you are.
Welcome back, Herb. I think you're on your fourth visit with us now.
Third or fourth, yeah.
Third or fourth, yeah.
But yeah, it's one of the fun and as people can probably see, in honor of Herb, I'll just get out of the way slightly for a minute.
Yeah. Well, and of course I've got
Your Skylab right above you. Yeah.
hmm
Uh, and it's a nice change because as anybody who watched this last month knows, everything was very Star Trek. But
That's
no,
okay too.
well, Gene Roddenberry, the space program, owes Gene Roddenberry a big thing because
Oh yeah.
back in the 60s, I think it was 66 Star Trek premiered. And of course, it inspired a lot of younger people, actually my age group and people of the same age group as Herb here, to get into aerospace and to get into space, to join people like NASA, Northrop,
hmm
um, Rockwell, because they wanted the future that Gene Roddenberry was painting for us with the likes of William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, Margell Barrett, and Jimmy Doohan, amongst others. Oh, and I must have, since I mentioned them, George Takei and Walter Koenig, must not forget to say them. Otherwise, I'll get insulting Twitter messages.
You will.
But as I say, it was one of those things. It opened up people's interest in space technology. So that's why we're all here. And I am just as guilty, I suppose. I came into this through Star Trek. I remember Star Trek because I suppose, along with Herb, I'm of the generation that remembers the Gemini missions, Apollo, disaster of Apollo 1, Apollo 8, and then all the way through to Apollo 17,
hmm
Skylab, Apollo Soyuz,
hmm
and then the orbiter. Most people today only really remember the orbiter
Yeah.
and the restriction to low Earth orbit. And I think the only time it really went any further was on the last servicing mission for Hubble. And I want to say it was George G.W. Bush Jr. that was president at the time. He insisted that a second orbiter was on the pad
Yes.
in case of any mishaps with the
Yep.
orbiter on the servicing mission.
And it was.
And it was the same way we had a Saturn 1B on the pad and ready to launch throughout the whole of Skylab.
hmm
It showed the commitment NASA had to its crews.
hmm
And I think in the end, it showed that Gene Kranz and Chris Kraft were totally right. Give us the tools, give us the people, give us the funding. We will do this.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to go into obviously the attempts to shut down Apollo after the fire in the command capsule
Yeah.
that lost us three very good astronauts, one of which Virgil
Gus Grissom.
Gus Grissom was actually slated for a lunar landing.
Yeah.
Um,
And I was in school with his two sons when that happened.
yeah.
We're still friends today. Mark
So
and Scott.
still today, Apollo resonates.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's a lot of people who, yeah, no, we never did it. It's a CGI thing. We didn't have CGI in those days, guys. We had stop go animation. We had a pretty good model making people. You look at Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea,
Mhm.
Star Trek. What Gene Roddenberry did in the 60s with very basic special effects. Um, was incredible,
Mhm.
but we could not fake the moon landings.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact,
Oh,
Adam
yeah.
Savage and company, the Mythbusters,
Yeah.
they took hold of this hot potato and proved categorically none of the pictures, which are considered to be the iconic pictures, the footprint, the flag moving on the moon, were
Mhm.
faked.
Yeah,
Because as they said, you've only got to touch the pole a
yeah.
slightest amount, and it starts moving back and forth. There
Mhm.
is nothing, no resistance there to stop it like it would on Earth.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, and of course, it was during the Cold War,
Yeah.
and the Russians and the Chinese would have had a field day.
They would have. They would have absolutely rat
Right.
everybody out straight away. There wouldn't have been
Oh,
any reason for them
absolutely.
not to.
Yeah. It was easier. The way I've heard it, which really resonated with me was it was easier to actually go there and
Mm,
do it than it would to have been to keep it secret
yeah,
for the past 55 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
there
That
was
was it was easier to actually do it
well, yeah, there was a comedy
and take it.
sketch in the
Yeah.
UK. And they're talking about, okay, how much is it going to cost us to fake the moon landings? Well, we still got to build a big rocket,
Mhm.
got to launch it.
Mhm.
So how much is it going to cost? Well, actually, it's going to be cheaper to go to the moon
Yeah.
than it is to fake.
Well, and again, not just that, it's the not having one person come out and say, okay, yeah, I admit it, we faked it
Yeah.
all, here's how we did it. Yeah.
But Mythbusters proved it beyond the shred of a doubt that we did go to the moon.
Yeah.
Yes, they had some pretty darn good fun time in the vacuum test chambers that NASA has,
Mhm.
proving like the footprint and everything else. Those guys are the top guys in Hollywood for special effects. If they can't fake it sufficiently, then nobody else can.
Mhm.
And they said, looking at the sample, the lunar soil sample, the regolith sample, yes, that footprint would have been extremely crisp.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And everything else, the angle of the sun, couldn't fake that with a studio light. There's
Mhm.
no way you could do it.
Mhm.
Actually, there's a reason I'm going into all this, because I know, Herb, that you're writing a book, and
Oh, yeah.
so this is my way. Is there doing? And to be honest, we've got Artemis coming up. So we're going to go back. We've had LRO. LRO has imaged
Yeah.
all the Apollo landing sites.
Yeah.
JAXA's Cayuga mission has imaged them even better in high definition
Mhm.
photographs to prove beyond a shred of a doubt that we were there. The descent stages of the lunar modules are still there. The
Yeah.
flags are there. The lunar rovers, the
Mhm.
experiment packs. There's
Mhm.
no way you could move those experiment packs robotically,
Mhm.
particularly in the early
Mhm.
missions. In
Yeah, yeah.
11, don't know if we did one in 11. No, in 12, 13, and 14, there is no way we could have had a robotic arm put that
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
scientific package there. We really didn't have the technology
Yeah.
because it required a human to sight it correctly and start it up.
Mhm.
Robotics, as they were fairly clumsy and kind of obvious. So
Mhm.
the bad news is, the sad news is really, I suppose, is I believe that once we get Artemis boots on the moon, people are still going to be saying, "Oh, it's Hollywood." Get a life, guys.
Yeah, well, there are people who believe the earth is flat, so
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
Oh my
that,
God. Yes.
that doesn't bother me. They can
Yeah.
believe whatever the heck they want.
Yeah. Well, the best thing is cats prove the earth isn't flat. If you put a cat on a table,
Otherwise,
Knock
everything
off.
would have been knocked off.
yeah,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be here. Pure and simple. Anyway, I'm going to shut up a little bit. I'm going to let Susan take over and start the ball rolling.
Well, Herb, again, we're here to speak to you again, but we are dying to hear about the new book. And I know the last time I spoke to you, you were getting into the editing pages or stages, I should say, not pages. So how's it all going?
Well, yeah, great. So the funny thing is, so I finished what I guess I would call the first draft in
Yeah.
actually a few months ago, I don't know, August or September, And so I ended up with about, so typically authors count books not so much in pages because, there's different size pages and different fonts and single space and double space. So they count words. And
Yeah.
so what I did a little checking up before I started, and the typical memoir, it's not a novel. This is all true stuff about my life at NASA. They said was about 50 to 60,000 words. And right now I have 77,000. And so, because, I read that, well, you can't make it too short or nobody is, it's not going to be worth, reading. But so after I finished the first draft, I said, okay, well, now I need to go back and proofread it, right? I mean, just spelling and grammar and punctuation and simple stuff like that. So I did that. And then the next time I went back and actually did some, personal editing. And, it's interesting. I wrote the first one, but I go back and read and I thought, why did I say it like that? And you add stuff and you take stuff out and you change the sentences around and you say it a little differently. So I did that. And then, I've never written a book before. I'd never taken any writing classes or anything like that. But I got a kind of a hint, you might call it, from another author. And he said, you could really have a much better, cleaner, more entertaining book if you take out words like things, good, really, very, great. They're just all lazy words, he called them. There's so many other words you could use that would be much more descriptive and interesting. So I did another, complete run through the book, taking out every one of those that I could without changing, the story, or if it was a quote from somebody, I left that in there. And so now I've sent the draft to a space historian, actually, Johannes Kimpen in Germany, for him to look at. He asked me if he could look at it for me, just to kind of help verify. I tried to make it as accurate as possible, and I have like 6 or 7 Rubbermaid containers full of documents in my closet of stuff I've saved over the last 55 years. Not only from covering the Apollo 11, 12, 13, 15 Skylab missions back when I was, like a teenager in my early 20s for the news media, but I saved a lot of things over my career. So, a couple of things I worked on back in the 80s, I still have, file copies of some of the stuff in my closet. So I was able to, um, know for certain that what I was writing actually happened and was true. And so that was an interesting story about, well, back in October. So there's the Columbia shuttle crashed back in 2003, and in the East Texas county where it came down, most of it came down, there's a museum there now, and it's been open for about 12, 15 years. And so they have an annual fundraiser. And so they asked me to come be their guest speaker at their annual Galactic Gala fundraiser in October. And so I talked about much of what's in my book. And the funny thing about that is there's an engineer, an NASA engineer friend of mine who was there too. And afterwards, she came up to me and said, "You have a great memory." And because I'm talking about the details of things that happened 50 years ago. I said, no. It's just because I happened to be looking at the documents and writing about it just a few weeks ago. It's not, it's not like I've, kept that at the tip of my tongue on my brain for the last 50 years. But and so now, next time and I'm actually think there's another guy who works in the local. We have a historic archive of NASA things at the University of Houston Clear Lake Library, and he's offered to edit the book for me. So I think maybe sometime this week I'll get it over to him too. And then even after all of that, I'm going to hire a professional editor to look at it too. And so then I'll start the publishing process, which typically takes months.
Yeah.
And I'll people ask me, I haven't really decided yet whether I will try to self-publish it or if there's someone out there, a publishing company or an agent who wants to to get it published, a more typical way, then I'll do that. So that's still TBD.
Well, I
But
was going to say,
I've had a hard time stopping writing.
Yeah.
There's things happening that I've added a few things just in the last month or two.
yeah, I was going to say that the Smithsonian seems to like to publish a lot of stuff about the space
Mhm.
program because I do have Fred Hayes' book here, um, which is I am enjoying it. It
Yeah.
takes me a while sometimes to read a book like that, but I go into it, I'll read a chapter, put it down, come back,
Oh yeah.
read another chapter. But it is such a fascinating insight from his point of view. I love the title too.
Yeah.
Never
Oh
Panic
yeah.
Early.
Yeah, kind of agree. Yeah,
Perfect. Yeah.
brilliant.
Well,
Perfect.
and maybe he's got a website too. There
Mhm.
were a lot of things that he wanted to include in his book, and here one of the disadvantages of having a publishing company publish it rather than yourself, you don't have any control,
Okay.
or you don't have as much control over what's actually in the book. And so he wanted to include many other documents and things, maybe photos, and they just said no, 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 that this is it. And so he decided, after the book was being actually printed and published, to have he didn't do it himself, he had someone develop a website for him. And so there now he's got all kinds of other stories and photos and
Fantastic.
documents that
Yeah,
that he would have incled in his book if he could have. That you should check that out too if you get a chance.
absolutely.
Oh,
The,
don't worry, I plan to.
Yeah.
the space historian in Germany you were speaking about, how long do you think it'll take him now to go through your book, or are you expecting any mistakes, or?
I don't, to be honest, I don't know. But you know
Yeah.
what? And I've gotten some feedback from him, but I'm not going to wait. I mean, if
Right.
he's just doing it, for nothing. He volunteered to do it. And so I'm not going to say, hey, when are you going to finish, looking at my book? And I'm sure he has other things to do. So, and like I said, there's this other historical archive librarian guy, a friend of mine, that has offered to look at it too. So I'm going to let him look at it, even though I haven't, gotten a final
Yeah.
response from the historian.
Have you
And
any idea of, I'm asking for the actual name, but have you come up with a couple of names you might think of, or?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to call it Apollo to Artemis, actually.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's fantastic.
so that adds another twist, right? Because
Yeah.
recently, the the Artemis 2 flight had been planned for late this year,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they've delayed it now to the
Mhm.
fall of 2025. And so, it's occurred to me that maybe it might be beneficial for me, for the timing of the publication of my book, to come out right about the time Artemis 2 is in the news. And so that's a year and a half from now. So I want to say I'm not in any rush, but at the same
No.
time, I'm not going to drag my feet, so to speak.
Right.
But again, I'm just going to let things happen as they normally would. I'm not, if the flight was still late this year, I might feel actually a little more like, okay, I need to get this thing going. If I'm worried about the timing of it, but yeah, looks like I'm going to have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, with the change in schedule for Artemis, it's all for the good because obviously it enhances the safety.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've sent humans back around the moon,
Mhm.
and we got to do it right. And I
Oh
think
yeah,
most of us who are into space flight and stuff realize that if the summit was to go, if they were to bodge it and go, which you can do with an unmanned mission, you're disproving the launch vehicle, which is fine. You've got to be an awful lot more careful because if something happened to the astronauts because it was rushed, it could actually be the death knell for the
yeah.
space program.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh
what's
yeah.
that?
After Challenger, we didn't fly for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Or yeah,
I,
I think or Challenger or Columbia or both, something like that. Yeah.
well, yeah, because I remember both incidents. I was in the States at the time, and I was coming home, and I got a phone call. Have you heard? I said, no, what? I said, Columbia blew up. I said, you're joking. He
Mhm.
goes, no. And I got home, it was on the television. Same with when we lost Challenger.
Yeah.
Um, so, but that I think was because us, the general public, we got blasé about the space fight. It became nearly a monthly occurrence or less that we were launching the shuttle, and people got, oh wow, we've done it, we've cracked it. We can launch every 3 weeks now, and it was a disaster.
Well,
Um,
that was part of the problem with NASA too, with the foam. They convinced themselves, no, we've had foam strikes for, many, many, many launches. In fact, the two shuttle launches just before Columbia, and it hasn't been a problem. Well, the big
Yes.
chunk of foam hit just the wrong spot, and it was a problem. So, yeah.
Well, I actually sat down and read some of the documents from the Challenger
Mhm.
inquiry, and the most telling stuff was done by Dr. Richard Feynman.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he
Good.
insisted on doing his physics experiment in front of the committee, which he was a
Mhm.
member of. And he says, this is why I'm refusing to sign it
Yeah.
unless you include it as a fact. And I, I, I think it was Ronnie Reagan at the time. Reagan insisted that Feynman was on the committee
Mhm.
because he was a guy who didn't rush stuff and
Yeah.
he didn't pull his punches. If there was something he found, he was going to announce it and say, this is what you got to look at. It was the O-rings.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
extreme temperatures, they perished and shrunk and allowed
Yeah.
gases to mix that should have never done.
Yeah.
And the SRBs exploded. It took out Challenger
Mhm.
during the launch. So yeah, we're NASA has the right philosophy is we test, we test, we test. Oh, something's just gone wrong. Let's look at what's gone wrong. Okay, we know what it is. We'll fix it. We test, we test, we test.
Yeah.
And with Artemis 2 coming up, we can say that we have tested this system to its limits and it has not failed. So we know it is capable of taking our team around the moon and bringing them home again. And that's how you do that. That's the
Mm.
ethos of Krantz and everybody else.
Mhm.
Chris Craft, right? We're going to do this. Um, there were moments which were shown, I think, even in the HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, where there were set times where the guys didn't want to come in. EVA for the first time, sitting on the nose cone of the Gemini spacecraft was like, my God, this is mind blowing. I feel so damn good, so there, so connected.
Mhm.
I think it was Ed White who was told he better get his backside back in fast. Is there a problem with this? No, he's
Mhm.
coming back in. Good, that's okay. But we're talking about humans here. And what we were doing there and then, we were doing stuff that nobody had ever done. We had just eclipsed the Russians. China wasn't even interested in the space race at that
Mhm.
point. And they were literally, as he said, as Chris Craft pointed out at the very beginning, this is in order to get from here to here, these are the steps we got to make. And we are going to do them and do them and do them until we get it right.
Hmm.
Because when we get it right, we'll move on to the next step and we're going to do exactly the same again.
Mhm.
And I think that's when they coined the term unobtainium for the metal they were going to
Mhm.
need to build the spacecraft. Well, we don't know we haven't got it yet. We're going to call it unobtainium because we haven't even created it. But we went ahead and did it. It
Mhm.
and people forget everybody was complaining about the cost, but why? Because the States was in an economic downturn at that point,
Mhm.
and that put the whole country back to work. It wasn't just high-tech companies, it was companies that most people had in their lives day in, day out, and never thought about it. People who made bras were making spacesuits, were stitching the gloves for the spacesuits and stuff because they knew how to make those stitches so they didn't go through the fabric.
International Latex Corp.
And literally, it was a national effort. And this is what it is again. People are getting excited about space. We want to go back. Of course, everybody's been saying, "Oh, but we're going to go to Mars." Well, we can't go to Mars until we go back to the moon. We prove everything in CIS lunar orbit. We prove it on the ground on the moon. Then we can talk about going to Mars.
Yeah.
So we are relearning the lessons from the 60s and early 70s because we've forgotten how to build rockets and send people beyond low Earth orbit. Basically, we got stuck in that groove.
Mm-hmm.
We go into high Earth orbit every now and again to service the Hubble, but it wasn't it, there were risks. But anyway, and yeah, I think one of the great things about your book is it's going to show us what's going on in the background, because we're used to seeing the public face, the everything, the PR,
Yeah.
one of a better word, the PR about what's going on. Astronauts were flying around the country talking to groups of people, selling the space program to them. And there were accidents,
Yeah.
but accidents happen. When humans and aircraft are going every which way, you get a situation where you're asking for trouble. And to be honest, I think the honesty that was shown at those points was the right thing.
Yeah. But Herb, I mean, NASA itself is an actual business. I mean, people just assume it's just a space program. It's an actual everyday running business that needs to be managed, which is a huge part. I don't know how much it is, but probably 40-50% of what is done in NASA is just business management and fund management and what you're going to fund next. So, I mean, if you could talk something like that.
Yeah, and in fact, even in some ways, even more than that. Back, I've been retired for 7 years now, and I think it's probably the same. But when I was still working, it was right around 88%, 88 to 90% of the money that NASA receives from Congress every year goes through the business office to NASA contractors. 10, 12% is spent on salaries and local equipment for running the center and things like that. Almost 90% of everything NASA does flows through the business office to contractors. And so, most people have no idea it's that large.
And they lose track of the fact that NASA's not just astronauts.
Oh yeah.
It's satellites which provide weather, that tracks climate,
Mars rovers.
It's so many different operations.
Yeah, all kinds of space science. Yeah, at the Johnson Space Center, I spent my entire career, almost 99.9% was human space flight. So people interested in astronomy and things like that will want to talk to me about whatever black holes and other planets, and go, well, I don't really, other than just my natural interest, I don't really have much to know to do with that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, an interesting thing in talking about behind the scenes, another thing back on Challenger, and I talk about this in my book. Another reason or contributing factors to that accident was, that was going to be the first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe.
Yeah.
And the plan was, and NASA plans the schedule almost to the minute, for these missions, especially shuttle missions. And even still today, to some degree, space station missions. And the plan was the launch on Tuesday, And on the third day would be the day that Krista talks to, does a media event with the schools. And so if they hadn't launched on that Tuesday, which they really, were kind of felt pressured to do, and had waited one more day. So launching on Tuesday would mean the third day would be on a Friday, a school day. If they had postponed for one day and launched on Wednesday, her lesson would be on a Saturday, and no kids are in school. And so I don't know how much that contributed, but that was at least one thing that was talked about.
Yeah.
I think. Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
No, it's not. I actually watched it live on BBC. Now I was only young and watched the launch. And as Nick said earlier, I think I wasn't that I wasn't interested, but I don't think there was a huge interest around with anyone. And I watched it and I looked at it, and then obviously what happened. And I actually looked at my father and was like, is this part of it? I didn't understand what had happened. It was probably the following day before I actually realized the pure disaster of what had just happened in front of people's eyes,
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I can't watch it anymore.
No,
anytime
yeah.
I see it, I have to,
You
turn
look away.
away. Yeah.
I think I have to agree with you because with that, Herb, because I think because I've read the report, and I really do recommend it because it gives you a very good idea about a lot of stuff, particularly when you get scientists trying to find the cause and explain what happened. It almost as if when I'm watching it, I can see exactly where the disaster is about to start. But again, it's because I read the report and I read Feynman's write-up. But again, NASA has this thing, it has to be on, it is honest, and it opens up and says, yeah, we screwed up. This is what happened. This is why this is how we're going to fix it. And eventually we got the shuttle missions back. Then we started finding out about tile damage from the foam.
Yeah.
And again, we had a hiatus. We came out of it. I think it was a bit sad. I think they retired the shuttles too soon. That's my personal opinion.
Unfortunately, speaking of the budget, NASA just couldn't afford to continue to fly the shuttle and then continue working on space station and thinking about starting, an Artemis program, going back to the moon, and just the U.S. Congress just wouldn't give NASA enough money to continue doing it.
But things have changed. We're going back to the moon. And it is gonna be great because one of the things that NASA did with the shuttle was have amateur radio on board.
Yeah.
And with the ISS.
Yes.
And now they're talking about all the astronauts on Artemis 2 are radio amateurs. They've all got call signs, and hopefully, touch wood, it's gonna be the pilot of all pilots when those guys get on the air. It's 2 meters, which is VHF, but because you're in space, you can point the antenna at the Earth and you can cover a very large part of the Earth very, very easily. The Russians proved that with the ISS when the main station radios went down. They used ham radio and phone patches to get in contact with Baikonur and Moscow to sort the problem out and get new radios sent. So it's one of those weird things. I always knew when there was a launch on because I would use Echolink, go onto the Kennedy Space Center repeater, and it would always come. There'd be this AI generated voice message saying access is denied, receive only. Because if push comes to shove, they need that repeater.
Yeah.
And repeaters in general, if you're in the radio amateur, anybody can use them. And that's the only time I've ever heard, apart from a national disaster scenario, where they can deny you repeater time. But it's great because it gives everybody a chance to speak to an astronaut. And with the amateur radio in space project, is brilliant because the kids get to speak to astronauts
Mhm.
and they get to actually hear the radio link, see the radio link in progress, which is again, it captures their minds. Everybody's used to these,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but to actually have to use a proper radio
Mhm.
to speak to a real astronaut, that is doing it proper. Anyway.
It happened here in Ireland there late last year. Some of the ISS astronauts spoke to a local school. I think the school was in Navan. I can't remember the name. But the pure excitement, and then I saw some pictures on Astronomy Ireland of the kids when they actually got to speak, just their faces. You know, it's like, I suppose, speaking to Santa Claus, you know, they were just absolutely delighted with themselves and things like that. Again, you're just getting the younger generation in, you get people interested. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So speaking of Fred, I'm sorry for interrupting. Go.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of Fred Hayes, so, you know, I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League,
Yeah.
and he just joined.
did
I mean, I don't know why he hadn't been a member anyway, but because he lives just, you know, a few miles from
That
here.
was fine, yeah.
But anyway, he joined. So he's been part of the another kind of similar organization, but it's only for people who worked in flight operations. It's MSOA, Manned Space Flight Operations Association.
Okay.
And so I just joined that organization. And so anyway, so I'm planning as secretary, I'm responsible for planning the socials for the Alumni League. And so we're having one in April, and I'm assuming he's going to be there.
Be there.
So yeah, I mean, I get to see him every once in a while anyway, but
Yeah.
now I'm going to get to see him for the NASA Alumni League events and the MSOA events. So yeah, that'll be nice.
He's still doing well. Fair play to him. I mean, I know he's older again, like fair
Well,
play to him.
he turned 90 in November, and I guess he won't mind me saying this. He has neuropathy of the feet, and so
Right.
it's hard for him to get around. He uses a walker,
Okay.
but he still is just as active as he can be, you know. And even when he joined, he said something about, yeah, hey, I still like to, you know, give talks and speeches. So you know, so we might even have him
Do
be a
that.
speaker at our one of our alumni events.
That sounds like
I want.
it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Well, okay. With the book you're writing, which are the chapters that you're really enjoying doing?
Well, so yeah, so I actually enjoyed all of them. I mean, you know, I just loved my job. I mean, you know, looking back on it, how I think is so blessed and lucky to have a career like that. And there's, you know, nowhere on, literally, it sounds funny to say it, like there's nowhere on earth I would rather have worked than the Johnson Space Center. And I don't mean just at NASA, I mean the Johnson Space Center, you know, with the astronauts worked in, you know, mission control and astronaut training and all of those cool things. And so I guess the ones that stand out, I actually, because I got to know and work with Fred for so much, and we've been friends now for almost 40 years. He just wished me a happy birthday last week on my
Yeah.
birthday, which was
Happy
nice.
birthday
Happy
from us.
birthday.
Yeah. So I devoted an entire chapter just to him
Wow.
because, you know, I mean, I might have done that anyway with everything he's been involved in, but actually getting you know, to tell the story of working with him and now continuing to see him, you know,
Mhm.
all of these years. So that was a fun chapter. One of my other favorites, as you might guess, was actually the
Your mom.
chapter about Skylab, because
Yeah.
not only did my mother play a role and seamstress for the parasol that replaced the heat shield that was lost,
Get out the way a bit so people can see it.
but
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. But you know, so for example, and I think maybe, you know, just last November, so it's been three or 4 years ago now, a guy in Germany, uh, uh, Dwight Stephen Bonieski, decided to create a Skylab, you know, documentary. and he included me in the film to tell my mother's story because she had passed away.
Yeah.
And so, we've had a few events in the movies, won like 14 or 15 awards, best documentary and best director, and several others. And so it's about the 50th anniversary. Uh, in fact, it was, I think, the 50th anniversary of the launch of the final Skylab crew. And the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation arranged an event at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex to show the film on their IMAX screen. And they invited me and two, legendary astronauts, Rusty Schweickart, who was one of the Apollo 9 astronauts, and he was one of the backup commander for one of the Skylab missions, and Jack Lausma, who flew on the second Skylab mission and was the commander for STS-3. And so all three of us were in the film. And so the director of the film invited me to, and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation invited me to KFC to participate on this panel. So there I am with Jack Lausma and Rusty Schweickart and me, and the director of the movie is asking us questions. I'm doing this panel, and it's like surreal, I can't believe I'm doing this. But yeah, so that was one of the things I had to add to the book after I thought I was finished, right? So that was fun to write. And so I have to tell one more story about that. So I mentioned the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation was kind of the sponsor of this, and so they paid for my hotel room, and when they sent me a copy of the the confirmation paperwork for my room, and I looked at it and it said, astronaut rate. And so I thought, well, that's something I never expected to get the astronaut rate at a
That's not
hotel.
right. Didn't even know there was one.
So, I mean, that's a really little thing, but that was just like, oh my gosh.
Fantastic thing. Yeah, that's an amazing thing, or unbelievable. I was actually, my own question after Nick's was just going to be about your mum and Skylab and everything else, and what you'd written. So, and how much of the book is back then, and how much the book is more up to the 90s and the 2000s.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's I think I guess the way I would characterize it is it's fairly evenly paced, so to speak. I mean, I did, like I said, I'm sure you guys, I've talked with you guys about it before. I was 17. Well, so first of all, even cover this, back when I was 12 years old, and they opened what was then the Manned Spacecraft Center, and the first two classes of astronauts moved into my community. I'm going to school with the Grissams, Cooper, Carpenters, Shiraz, and Bormans, and Lovels, and so and then by the time I was 17, a few years later, July of 1969, Apollo 11 was about to launch, and the TV networks headquarters are in New York City, and they would send crews down to Houston and set up a mobile home, a trailer to be their studio, and they'd put a backdrop and have a desk and then a camera, and they would bring astronauts and flight directors in and interview them. And to get to be shown broadcast on TV, the film, back then there was not so much, large file transfers or the internet or videotape. And so if you filmed an interview, that film had to be physically moved from Houston to New York. So they hired me, because I was local and knew my way around, to drive twice a day to Houston Intercontinental Airport, which is about, almost 60 miles away, to put the film on an airplane to be flown to New York so it could be broadcast on TV. And I did other things too. I made a lot of trips back to the public affairs office to pick up flight plans and press kits and mission commentaries and photos and all of those things. And so anyway, so I did that, worked for ABC TV for Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13. I'd gone away to college for Apollo 14, but I came back and worked Apollo 15 and then a couple of the Skylab missions. And so obviously I talked about that. I'm sure I've told you, I don't know if you remember it, for Apollo 12, my favorite story from all of that was for Apollo 12, when it splashed down at the end of their mission in November 69 in the South Pacific. they had sent me and a cameraman to Pete Conrad's home to film their family watching on their TV as Apollo 12 splashed down into the
Amazing.
South Pacific. So I was with his family in their living room when the Apollo 12 splashed down at the end of their mission. And boy, and then this was like 3:30 in the afternoon, and the TV station, local Houston TV station, this was a local human interest story. It didn't need to be taken to New York. They were in such a hurry to get it by the evening news that day that rather than take a chance on me driving the film to their studios in Houston, they rented a helicopter to fly
Wow.
from the manned spacecraft center to 20 miles to their studio. And I still remember, I'm 17. I've never been in a helicopter before, and it's just two-seater and it's all
Yeah.
glass. And the guys, I remember the guy telling me, "Yeah, I just got back from flying missions in Vietnam," and I'm hanging on to that. Oh, what a ride that was! And so, all kinds of good stories like that. So,
Yeah.
even
But
from
you've had
time
an
I was,
extraordinary work life and just a normal life. So, I mean, yeah, I can't wait to read the book now. And the name
yeah,
is amazing,
yeah,
College
but
Hard.
yeah,
Couldn't
yeah,
get any
but like I
better.
said, yeah, one of my favorite chapters is about Skylab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, it was you that helped me confirm a story on a abandoned engineering TV show, because what people didn't realize here in the UK is that two American air bases, RAF Woodbridge and Bentwaters,
Mm.
were actually
Oh,
involved
yeah,
with the Apollo program. They
right.
were designated the reception center should an Apollo capsule either land in the Mediterranean or the
Hmm.
North Sea.
Hmm.
And of course, they've got this one building that's inside so many fences at the airbase, and everybody had been wondering for years, what was it? And it turns out, because I was asking you about it, they had one of the boilerplate capsules stored in there because they were practicing at night retrieving it from the North Sea.
Hmm.
And of course, it even triggered a UFO
Yeah.
thing, because the helicopters were very, very quiet, and all they could see was a pattern created by the strobes on the aircraft.
Hmm.
And of course, rumor has it that they dropped the capsule in the middle of the woods by accident. Rumor. And of course, they had to retrieve it. That meant that the security police from the air bases shut off the woodland area completely. So of course, the UFO story went completely viral for the
Yeah.
time, because suddenly there's all these US airmen with weapons crawling through this wood. And one of the locals was saying he'd seen a UFO go down in there. But it wasn't. From what I understand, it was probably the boilerplate capsule they were
Yeah.
practicing with. And of course, they had to retrieve it without giving the game away, because
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
nobody outside of NASA and the US military knew what was going on at that point.
Hmm.
So, and obviously it was a classified training mission at the time, but it's one of those lovely things that kind of blew out of all proportion, caused a UFO scare, and it's still talked about locally in the Bentwaters, Woodbridge area. But it's one of those really, really weird things. Nobody thought Britain would play a part
Hmm.
in the Apollo space program that way. And I don't think even today it's that well known.
Yeah.
Um, but hey, it's kind of nice that I can actually debunk a UFO story. My first and only UFO story, I'm
Hmm.
totally and utterly debunking.
Hmm.
But,
Yeah.
one of those really weird things. And of course,
Yeah.
I owe it all to you, because
Yeah.
I asked you about it,
Yeah.
and you were very kindly confirmed which air bases were involved and what was going on.
Yeah. That was an interesting story, though. Yeah. Yeah.
But
So I guess a couple of other things I also enjoyed. So I helped. Do you guys know about the Super Guppy? The really funny
yeah,
looking airplane.
yeah,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I, so I helped acquire that for NASA at about 1997, 98. They were just starting to finish up building the modules that would be flown on the shuttle to space to be connected to form the space station. And NASA didn't have a way to transport anything that large and they didn't want to send it, by train or certainly by road or by boat. And so, and if you know, the Super Guppy is huge. It was built to transport, large loads. And so NASA didn't have a lot of money uh, to buy airplanes, but we actually made a three-way barter with the European Space Agency and Airbus. And so Airbus gave NASA the Super Guppy, and ESA paid the money to Airbus for the plane, and we gave ESA 450 uh, well, about 900 pounds of shuttle up mass, which just means, whatever you want to fly, experiments or food or whatever, we will let you, fly that for nothing now on future space shuttle missions. So it was a three-way barter. And then one of the last things I did before I retired, um, it's kind of an interesting story. I got to have and another thing I might want to add to my book, just last week or the week before, I participated in the 30th annual Space Exploration Educators Conference at Space Center Houston. There were almost 600 educators, mostly classroom teachers from all over the world, actually. In fact, I've been in touch with one of them who was there from Colombia, and Canada and Japan and the UK and a few others, and so it's 3 days of mostly these teachers doing breakout sessions where they have little classes where they teach other teachers, hey, here's a cool little project or something you can do in your classroom, or make, or a game or something to get your kids, students interested in space and STEM and that kind of thing. And so anyway, NASA's really good about having astronauts come over to support that. So
Yeah.
so I got to spend some time with Dottie Metcalf Lindenberger, who was an education astronaut, and Joe Acaba from a guy who's his parents were born in Puerto Rico, who's now the chief of the astronaut office,
Oh,
and Megan MacArthur, who's married to Bob Behnken. And so anyway, I say all that. So I was having dinner next to Megan MacArthur at the banquet Friday night, and I told her, hey, I can tell you a story about the first time I got to work with your husband, Bob Behnken. And the first Demo 2 launch, was it Doug and Bob? It was Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken.
mhm.
So anyway, back up a few years to when I was still working, and it was Scott Kelly was due to come home from his 1 year in space, and so NASA had a Gulfstream 3 aircraft that we would fly to Kazakhstan to pick up our astronauts and fly them back. And I got called to a meeting by the director of flight operations, and he didn't tell me why, what the meeting was about. And so I showed up, and I see Bob Behnken, who was at that time chief of the astronaut office, and the director of flight operations, and a bunch of aircraft operations guys. And Bob had kind of a scowl on his face, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to be a fun meeting, it looks like. And so anyway, the problem was that the Gulfstream 3 airport they needed to fly to Kazakhstan to pick Scott Kelly up had a problem, and they had ordered a part to fix it, but they weren't sure it was going to be received in time to install it and go pick him up. So they told me I need to be prepared to go charter an airplane to use instead to
Right.
go pick him up. And so I did that, which is something I had never, done in my life for anything. And so anyway, yeah, my entire career up to almost the last day was interesting and challenging, exciting, and doing new things. But anyway, to get to the point of all of this, after that worked out okay, the director of flight operations told me one day, we need a newer, better, faster, longer range aircraft to go pick our astronauts up from Kazakhstan. So he asked me to go buy a Gulfstream 5 aircraft with NASA's money, of course, not mine. Uh, but and I say, asked me to buy it. They made me what they called the source selection official. So we had a competition where we issued a solicitation and said, hey, NASA wants a Gulfstream 5 aircraft, and send us your bid or proposal. And I was the one who got to pick which airplane we would buy.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, one of the astronauts, Greg Johnson, we call him Ray J, and thinking, you want me to do that and not one of you? And he said, yeah, no, that's right. And so, okay. And so anyway, I worked really, really, really closely with astronaut Greg Johnson on that process, but we ended up buying what was Nike was using as a corporate aircraft. And another interesting thing about that, so every Monday morning I would go to the flight operations staff meeting before, the Monday morning at 7:30 to begin the week, and kind of, because they even work obviously on weekends for mission control, which is part of flight operations. And so the leaders of flight operations always got together at 7:30 Monday morning, and they invited me to the meeting. And so the guy who was responsible for the flight directors and mission control and the chief of the astronaut office would be there, and whoever was responsible for astronaut training and all kinds of other things were sitting at the table, and they would go around and let them give a status on what, if anything, happened in the last several days. And then some of us would be sitting around the back of the room, and so the reason at this time, so this was like in the spring of 2016, and so there was a presidential election coming
Right.
in the US, which Donald Trump won.
Mhm.
And so anyway, the guy, when he asked me to buy the plane, he said, well, let's shoot for having it here in February 2017. I thought, oh, okay, we can do that. And so then as a couple of months went by, he started thinking, oh, you know what? We may have a new president, and I don't want a new president to come in, before February
Right.
and decided, you know what, I don't want to let NASA buy this airplane. So he said, can you finish this by September 30th, which is the end of NASA's fiscal year? And so for the next couple of months, as he's having this Monday morning staff meeting and going around the room and letting everybody, give an update on status, he would get to me and he wouldn't let me say anything. He would just point to me and say September 30th. And so I'm like, oh gosh, the pressure. And so anyway, over or through so much luck, I can't even tell you how lucky I was. September 29th, that plane showed up at Ellington Field,
Wow.
one day early. And it was so cool that the Ellen Ochoa, who was the director of the Johnson Space Center, came out to Ellington, and we had a whole party with a cake and everything to celebrate getting that plane. And so that was just like 3 months before I retired.
Yeah, it's not exactly something you Google, like where to buy a Gulfstream jet. So I can only imagine where you have to go and who you have to speak to. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And so those planes had been, if you're interested, those planes had been selling a year or two earlier for like $30 million. And we bought this one for, I think it was 13 million.
wow.
So yeah, it felt like we got a great deal. And NASA's still flying that plane,
It's still using it.
7
Wow.
years later. So I'm sorry.
Sorry, Nick, did you say something?
Oh,
Oh,
No. God,
I-
I think there may be sound cut out there for a second. So they're still using it now, and I mean, obviously, it's helped, like you're able to collect your astronauts quicker and everything else.
were you talking to me? I did.
Yeah, I think there might be something wrong with the sound. I just said, so it's still using it now, and do they use it often to collect astronauts from different places, or?
Well, actually, so we're not flying as often. It's
Yeah.
much more or less frequent now. It's used for other things.
Right.
Yeah, but when they do have to, when an astronaut flies on a Soyuz, back and forth to the ISS,
Right.
they still use it to go pick them up. But it's mostly used for other things now.
Yeah.
well, I know there's an up and coming astronaut crew going up to the ISS. And as an upstate New Yorker, I better say something, otherwise there's a few there that will be upset if I don't. Because Syracuse's own Jennifer Lepps is going up to the ISS.
Hmm.
shortly. So
Right.
I'm sure everybody who listens, the people I know who do listen to the show there, are going to be happy now because some of them, well, one guy I know over there in Syracuse told me all about it. So, John, if you're listening, I mentioned it. But well, the good thing is, obviously the aircraft would have come with a very good flight maintenance schedule.
Yeah. Saying if you're
That
going, if you
really helped as well because I know that these aircraft, if they fly a lot of miles, then they get grounded. They got to be maintained. So yeah, okay, 13 million, that's a steal. Considering obviously everything you had to go into to make sure that the plane was airworthy and could be maintained at a economic cost.
Oh yeah. We before we decided which one to buy, I didn't do it personally, of course, but we had our aircraft operations folks go look at and check the maintenance records and actually fly the planes and all of that and then reported back to me on what they thought were the best criteria for deciding which plane to use. And of course we bought a Gulfstream 5 because it's very much interchangeable parts with even the Gulfstream 3. And so specifically they asked for a Gulfstream 5.
Well, NASA's always had a good taste in aircraft. Putting a British hat on because it's still flying Canberras, RAF Canberras. They got the license
Oh,
because it was one of the few aircraft that could be modified for sensor suites for atmospheric investigation. So an aircraft that the RAF took out of service late 60s, as I remember, and I'm sure someone's going to correct me if I got it wrong, is still in operation with NASA. And that's the BA, I think it's the BAE Canberra. And I know it was built under license in the States in order to to be acceptable for purchase because it's basically I know that NASA has to buy American.
generally,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the Buy America Act,
yeah. So basically by building it, I think they got three of them by building them under license. And I think they gave them a new name and everything, but they're still flying that aircraft even today for atmospheric research. So I really that's a testament just to how careful NASA is when it buys aircraft for itself. It really looks for an aircraft that can perform and have longevity.
Yeah. It was interesting. Another point, the Gulfstream 3, when they were using that to pick up astronauts, because of its limited range, had to make I think 2 stops. And sometimes they're in a little bit more of a hurry. Certainly, the astronaut wants to get home, but sometimes they're also bringing home scientific experiments or something like that. And so the Gulfstream 5 could fly nonstop from Kazakhstan to Houston, but to do that, it would have to fly over the North Pole.
Mm.
And I didn't think about that until somebody told me that, and I thought, well, that's right, because I'm picturing it flying just from
Just directly.
east to west, but it wouldn't have to go over the North Pole. It could make it in one stop. But they said no, we don't want to take that route.
Yeah.
So they end up stopping in either I think Scotland or maybe going to the Far East Coast like Maine. But they only had to make one stop in the Gulfstream 5.
Well, the reason for not flying over the pole is that for high altitude flights, there is an increased radiation risk, even more so during solar maximum, because when we start getting CMEs coming off, there's also an associated radiation storm, which it generates a beautiful display, the Aurora Borealis and Australis. But at the poles, there's a higher radiation risk to aircrew and passengers than, say, flying at a lower latitude. So that's one of the reasons not really to fly over the poles unless you really have to.
Yeah, that could factor into it too. Yeah.
And course, you probably remember this. During, I think it was one of the last Apollo missions. There was a solar event which happened fortuitously at just the right moment, because a few days later we would have had astronauts in orbit,
Oh,
and they would have got a lethal dose at that point. But it happened just before the launch, as I remember, and I'm probably going to get corrected if I get it wrong. But so it be, because I remember it was being discussed in a solar weather lecture a week or so ago that I attended. So and ironically, it was during solar minimum, so we avoided a Carrington class event just before. Well, we kind of had it, but it was a glancing blow. It wasn't a full-on Carrington event, but it happened just right, because otherwise we'd have had astronauts in space, which could have been bad.
yeah.
But it's one of those fortuitous occasions. We got lucky. It happened. Then the launch happened, and we were okay. Everything that happened was good. But it just goes to show you how, in a lot of cases, how careful NASA is with its people.
Yeah, it has to be. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
I we know that, okay, we have a better appreciation of solar activity and space weather now than we did then.
Mhm.
But what people forget is, all at the time of the last real effective solar maximum, computers were the size of a room
Mhm.
at UNIVAC. So that was the last time our technology really got tested by solar events. The earliest desktop computers were coming in. We didn't have mobile phones at all. Um, and we didn't have the cloud. We didn't have voice over internet protocol, VoIP. Now we do. And none of
Mhm.
this technology is really tested for a really energetic solar maximum.
Hmm.
And of course, one of the things, Skylab, one of the experiments, I believe, was a solar telescope.
Oh, yeah.
It was the infancy of solar weather
Yeah.
investigation. So they had a very good solar telescope aboard Skylab.
Yeah.
Um, but it's one of the interesting things. I'm into heliophysics as well
Oh,
as planetary science, and I really get I speak to one of the professors at Millerville in Pennsylvania, and the courses that she runs, and she's put a lot of her stuff on YouTube, and it's really interesting. And the way she's tracked the technology changes over these events. The Bad Boy Carrington event was 1867, when the telegraph system literally caught fire. The reason that it caught fire was there were sparks coming off the keys, falling on the telegraph pads, setting fire to the telegraph offices. Since then, we've had various other solar events, but it seems to be that a lot of these Carrington events happen during solar minimum as well.
Hmm.
But as I said, it one of the things Skylab did for us, it really kickstarted solar observation,
Yeah.
particularly from
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. That was a big part of their scientific investigation. Yeah.
So today, in the 21st century, we have an awful lot to be thankful
Hmm.
for what
Yeah.
those teams
Yeah.
do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
really,
Yes.
and it was transistor, all
Yeah.
transistors,
Hmm.
no integrated circuits.
Hmm.
Um, Valves are very difficult to fly. You can't fly valves into space. The vibration will shatter them. You can put them on aircraft that can just about exceed Mach 1 and get away with it, but you can't take valves into space. So our transistors were the best technology we had, and it was radiation hardened.
Hmm.
That is the technology on Pioneer Mariner, and Voyager is
Yeah.
early TTL, transistor logic,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it's still working.
Mm-hmm.
This is a late 50s, early 60s technology that got grabbed by the space program as being their savior in electronics,
Mm-hmm.
and it really kickstarted everything for us. Best thing about, if you don't have a space program, you don't have technological growth, really, if you look at it, because everything we have today came not so much from Mercury, certainly from Gemini onwards. We started seeing the spikes in technology advances. So by the time we got to Skylab, we had proven TTL technology to the point that we know it works. It doesn't matter what space chucks at it in the form of cosmic rays or solar radiation. This stuff is going to work and keep going. Um, so when people say, "What's the space program done for us?" It's done a lot.
Oh yeah,
Done
yeah.
so much, so much.
Yeah.
Even the satellites today that we use for communications, being able to link in live time with no delays, is a product of the space program. It's the trickle down from NASA's space programs. Everybody gets to take advantage of it. Given freely. Once it's proven, it's free to put out there for the commercial sector.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the other side of the flip coin is, why don't we have dinosaurs? Well, they never had a space program.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So,
That's right.
Hopefully detected. And even today, NASA is working on the current generation and the next generation of ways to deflect a multi-ton object coming out of space. That's the name written on it, or a comet, or whatever. That is what we get from a space program. The fact that we should survive.
Yeah.
Eventually, we'll have Planet B, which will be Mars. Man gets off the Earth and away from the moon, and we start going into the outer solar system. We are truly a spacefaring species. And no matter what happens to home in the terms of cosmic accidents, mankind will survive.
Yeah.
And this is what Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, the orbiter program, Artemis, and I'm going to say it's even Starship is going to give us. And nobody can go from zero to having a working space launch system without blowing up on the launch pad.
Oh yeah.
So had it happen.
Yeah.
We had it happen in the UK with our space program at Woomera. People forget we had a space program. We were actually putting satellites up using Black Knight rockets fired or launched rather from Australia. We'd shipped everything by sea to Australia because it was the middle of nowhere. Perfect. If there was going to go, something was going to go wrong. Okay, we have a big bang. There's nobody here to get hurt except us. But that's the risk you take with space. There is no gain without risk. And I think a lot of people forget, without the people who have gone before the current generation, taken the risks. They've found new risks. They worked on the risks. Life is not risk-free. You could get out of your car, cross the road and get hit.
Yeah.
You could get on a boat, go for a sailing trip, and a whale will take out your boat. It has been happening. Killer whales have been attacking sailing boats, sail yachts. So whatever we do as a species, every day is a risk. It's a managed risk.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things I'm looking forward to seeing in from your book, is how we actually managed it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Oh yeah, risk management. I mean, we had all kinds of we hardly went to a meeting and made a presentation without describing the risk management, from from likelihood of the occurrence to how bad the result might
Yeah.
be. You have a matrix, 1 1 to 5 5, never happens, or no consequence to, very likely to happen to major consequence. And which one did it fit in? Yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking
Well,
of UFOs and Skylab reminded me of another kind of interesting story I wrote about in my book. So in Skylab, so you know about Area 51 in the US? Yeah.
We do.
So the oh, excuse me, the Skylab astronauts were told not to take photos of Area 51. And so apparently they either forgot, or, over a couple of the missions, or didn't realize that that's where it was. And so when they, were back home after the program was over, and people are, going through the photos, the folks reviewing the photography realized that they had taken some photos of Area 51. And so the first thought was, oh, well, let's just, and every photo was numbered, of course, in sequence. And the first thought was, oh, well, let's just remove those photos, because otherwise all those photos would be made, public. And apparently Chris Kraft, the NASA's first flight director, and who the Mission Control Building is named after, and was the center director when I started there, decided that, no, you know what? I think the fact that we might have missing numbers in that sequence is more likely to cause someone to question it, that if we just pretend, just ignore it. And sure enough, it wasn't until 45 years later that someone realized, who was, reviewing those Skylab photos, that, hey,
Wow.
wait a minute, that's Area 51. You guys weren't supposed to take photos. And by that time, no one cared. So
No one cares.
well,
yeah,
thing is,
after almost 50 years, yeah.
Yeah. It was never noticed.
Area
Yeah.
51 is only one thing. It is a proving ground for experimental aircraft.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the fact that it's known that they everybody knows that there is this place in the middle of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's top secret. It's off limits. That is kind of like a sign says, putting up a sign says, conspiracy nuts, we are
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. The harder you try to keep people out, the more people are going to want to.
Oh yeah,
What the heck? What the heck are you hiding from us? Yeah.
yeah. Even today, you
Yeah.
get people going, there's on ATVs trying to get as close as they can to the runways
Mm-hmm.
because they're convinced that they're flying some UFO
Yeah.
captured out of Groom Lake.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, at worst, all they're trying to do is stop you seeing the latest fighter or bomber
Yeah.
aircraft. And most of the time, they don't fly in the day; they fly at night
Hmm.
because that way they can guarantee know exactly where the SATs are, the reconnaissance SATs, and know what the gap is. Bing. And most of the time, it's done at night. They go over because they feel that the infrared would be a better way to capture whatever they're doing there.
Hmm.
They just plan the flights between SATs. And
Yeah.
that's all even Netflix has a documentary up where they actually got access. They had somebody who used to work there and they got access to Area 51. And I
Hmm.
think it's well liked. It's a well liked show.
Hmm.
And it does actually flag up on their most watched.
Hmm.
Not high up, but it
Yeah.
flags because people still
Yeah.
watch it, expecting revelations about alien bits and
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And all it basically is it's an ex-worker there who's saying, well, gee, if we had that stuff, we'd find somewhere else that's a little bit more inconspicuous to hide.
It's like the gift shop outside. We're putting all the funny stuff here. You can come and have a look. We're going to keep the good stuff in the back.
Yeah.
Well, I remember one person when General Michael E. Ryan, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the States, had his cameo in Stargate SG-1, the Prodigy episode. He came to me and he says, I can prove the Americans have got Stargate in Cheyenne Mountain. Why? Because a Joint Chief of Staff had a walker. The guy has a resume of walk-ons in sci-fi. He's been on DS9. He's been in Babylon 5. He likes to act in his spare time. That's his thing.
Hmm.
And for once, he got to put it on SG-1, he got to play himself.
Hmm.
And the story goes that they just filmed the initial scenes in General Hammond's office. And the guy playing Jack O'Neill, and I can't remember his name, I really should. Richard Dean Anderson, that's it, says, I guess you're happy you haven't got guys like the guy I'm playing in SG-1. And he goes, son, we've got a few of them. And he said, the guy, Richard Dean Anderson, was like, oh. He said,
Mhm.
one of those things. He says,
Mhm.
it is known we have mavericks in all the world's militaries who are really good at their job and do it slightly against the rules. You
Mhm.
get the results, everybody's happy.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just one of those things, unfortunately. Just because a general in the Air Force likes to do cameos in sci-fi. Oh, America's got a Stargate. It's operating a real Stargate.
Yeah.
Dream on.
Mhm.
But,
Yeah. Hmm.
well,
Yeah. Well, any other
hopefully,
questions for me?
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to ask. Because we've covered, as usual, we've covered an awful lot of territory.
Yeah.
I just want to wish you the absolute best of luck with it. And I mean, the name is just fantastic.
Yeah.
And I hope you get from your 77 plus thousand words down to something that you think is sizable for everyone. And it's a great thing to hear that Fred Hayes has set up his own site as well about his own book for anything extra that we haven't seen and haven't read. That's definitely something we could put into the Sky Notes as well,
Oh, yes.
Nick, because I mean, it's definitely something I'd like to just. Of course, it would be impossible to put every single thing in every book, but it's going to be great to read extra bits now as well. You know, that's a great thing to know. And I wish you the best of luck with the Alumni Society and meeting up with Fred Hayes now again.
And do send Fred our regards when you next speak to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
And
okay.
can I just mention something? I am now the secretary of the Boyne Valley Astronomical Society. We only set up in January. So I just want to, hey guys, to everybody, we're going from strength to strength and we hope for it to go on for a very long time. So long live the Boyne Astronomical Society.
Well, I'm looking forward. I don't care how long the book is. I will read. Don't trust me. I read it.
Yeah.
I've got a 3-part book on lunar history and exploration.
Oh,
Each
okay.
segment is like that thick.
Mhm.
So if I can sit down and read that without a problem, trust me.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, of course, I talked about, counting words rather than pages, but I mean, I did, create a PDF version of it to provide to the guys who were reviewing it for me. And so, on kind of a standard PDF page, double spaced, it's about 280 pages. So
Yes,
I'm
please.
guessing, yeah, somewhere in that kind of ballpark. Yeah.
I'd definitely say yes, please to that.
Well, and that's without any pictures at all, which is going to be another interesting uh, part of the process is, because actually Fred dealt with that too. And every picture, I think every picture in Fred's book is in black and white. And it turns out that in publishing a book, that having color pictures makes it, much more expensive. And so I might just go with black and white photos, but even then it's
Yeah.
good because I have photos, associated with almost every story I tell. And so it's gonna be hard for me to, say, well, no, that's way too many photos. You got to take some of those out. So anyway, that'll be an interesting part of the process too.
I think you're going to have to do what Fred's done.
Oh, I plan to actually.
Definitely.
I've already talked with a website developer about creating a website for me. So yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Well, can't wait.
Yeah, I can put all the photos I want there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just like Fred. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because you can just link it to the chapters and then we can just dive in, start reading.
Even that too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be a brilliant immersive event. Being able to be reading the book physically, or even
Uh,
on a e-reader, and then just be looking at the website on the computer and just
yeah.
clicking as you're reading, clicking onto the
Mhm,
pictures,
mhm.
having them update
Yeah.
brilliantly on a nice 27.5-inch screen.
Mhm.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and so Fred does have on his website a couple of photos that I provided to him of him and me. And you know, it's again, it's stuff that's not in the book, but it's on his website. You know, I think, you know, he and I worked together in 1987, 88, 89, and he and I, there was a almost $1 billion space station contract that he signed for Grumman and I signed for NASA that we had negotiated, and then he and I worked together for a couple of years before I moved to headquarters downtown. And so I had shared with him a photo of the contract that has his signature and my signature, and a photo of that the president of Grumman had flown me up to their headquarters in New York to pose for the photo with the company newsletter. And there's the president of Grumman sitting at the desk pretending to sign this contract that Fred and I had already signed. And Fred and I are standing next to each other, you know, behind him. And I had dark hair. Yeah, it's 1987. But yeah, I really enjoyed that he included that photo in his website.
Very cool.
Well, we've actually done. We started at 7:30. It's now
Yeah.
9 o'clock. So
I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, it was
oh
great.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
probably keep going on, but I don't. I think we better be fair on everybody.
Yes, yes.
Start wrapping.
Yeah, it's getting late for you all there, right?
Yeah, it's 20:59.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zulu. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, very
uh,
good night from myself and everybody here in Ireland. Thanks so much, Herb.
Oh,
brilliant seeing you again, Herb, and it's great having you on. And it's good night from me.
Good night from me.
all right. Yeah. Again, thank you for inviting me. I always enjoy speaking with you all, and you know, if we want to do this again sometime,
Definitely.
Oh yes.
Absolutely.
when the
Yep.
timing's right, just let me know, you know, because
Well, of course, Herb.
continuing to try to do things and learn new things and give presentations and speeches and be involved in things. And you know, I'd love to talk about those things at some other time.
Well,
Absolutely. Of course.
hopefully, touch wood, I will be back in the States by at least Artemis 3.
Wow.
And I have been speaking with my daughter about going down, doing a trip down to watch the launch
Oh yeah.
because
That'll be amazing if you get to
oh
do
yeah,
that.
Mm.
because
Yeah.
she's
That'll be
a generation that's never seen a
yeah.
real rocket launch. It was
That'll
on
be
television, but actually being there and feeling it.
Oh yeah. Oh, because you feel it.
Oh yeah,
You see it and hear it and feel it. Yeah.
this wall of sound that just comes at you.
Well,
Oh,
and the ground vibrates.
mm,
Yeah. I mean, very slightly, but there's a YouTube video from a space shuttle launch where cars and people are watching a launch from 3 miles away, and the
mm,
car alarms start going off
Oh,
because
wow.
the ground is
yeah.
starting to vibrate. So absolutely, that'll be an historic day.
Well, okay, I think it's time to wrap then. So brilliant having you again, Herb.
Yeah.
And I'll say good night at this point,
All right.
and I'll get a copy of the show to you.
Okay. Yeah.
And look forward to seeing you soon.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Good night to you all too.
See
Night,
you.
Herb.
All right.
Bye.
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 Okay, I'm going to fly because I'm so dying to go to the toilet.
Okay, I'm just trying to remember where the down button is.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.